The biting air tore at her exposed skin, sharp and unforgiving. Each breath was a jagged shard in her chest, a cruel reminder of the life that had just ripped itself from her body and the one clinging feebly against her breast. The forest floor was a cold, damp cradle, strewn with decaying leaves that offered no warmth, only a chilling decay that mirrored her own state. Pain, a dull, relentless throb centered low in her belly, pulsed in time with her weakening heartbeat. She lay huddled, a thin, torn blanket her only shield against the encroaching night and the indifferent wilderness. Above, the branches were skeletal fingers against a bruised, moonless sky. Fear, cold and sharp, was a constant companion, pressing down heavier than the weight of her own limbs. It was the fear of the dark, of the sounds that stirred in the undergrowth, of the absolute crushing aloneness. But mostly, it was the fear for the tiny, vulnerable bundle she held, swaddled inadequately in scraps of fabric. The infant's cries were weak, reedy, a heartbreaking protest against the cruelty of their arrival into this world. Each whimper was a fresh wave of despair, a tiny hammer blow against the fragile fortress of her will. How long had it been? Hours? A day? Time had blurred into a haze of agony and fading consciousness. She remembered the frantic urgency, the searing pain, the moment of release followed swiftly by the brutal abandonment. Left here, like refuse, unwanted and discarded, with the fragile proof of her transgression. The woods had closed in, silent witnesses to her undoing. She had crawled only a short distance from where they had left her, the effort immense, spurred only by the instinct to find some small, hidden place to die or perhaps to cling to life for the sake of the innocent scrap she now sheltered. Her body was failing her, cold seeping into her bones, strength draining away like water through cupped hands. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled her nostrils, a scent of finality. She pressed the baby closer, feeling the faint warmth radiating from the small body, a last ember in the gathering cold. Her fingers, numb and stiff, fumbled with the blanket, trying to tuck it more securely. A sudden snapping twig nearby brought her fully alert, a jolt of primal terror piercing through the haze. She froze, straining to hear over the infant's soft cries and the pounding in her ears. Was it an animal? Or something worse? The people who had brought her here, the cruel, judging faces that had turned away as her world splintered apart? She held her breath, the pain momentarily forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. Silence returned, thick and heavy, broken only by the wind sighing through the trees and the faint, mournful cry of a distant owl. She exhaled slowly, the sound a ragged gasp. Survival felt like a cruel joke. What was there to survive for? Shame burned hotter than the fever she was sure was setting in. Shame for her naivety, for her trust, for the irreversible mistake that had led her to this desolate place. But looking down at the tiny face, a flicker of something else ignited a fierce, protective fire, fragile but stubborn. She had nothing left but this child, this life that depended solely on her broken one. She would not die, not yet. She had to find shelter, warmth, safety. But the strength wasn't there. The woods pressed in, dark and indifferent, a vast, silent maw threatening to swallow them whole. The sound was distant at first, muffled by the dense trees, a rhythmic thudding, growing steadily louder. Hoofbeats, followed by the creak of wagon wheels. Fear, sharp and immediate, flared again. She tensed, her body rigid despite the profound weakness, trying to shield the infant with her own failing form. The sound came closer, breaking through the undergrowth, and then, a man on a horse leading a sturdy wagon emerged into the small clearing. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. He stopped, his gaze sweeping the clearing, methodical and unhurried, until it landed on the small, huddled form on the ground. His eyes lingered, unreadable from her vantage point. She couldn't speak, couldn't cry out, could barely breathe. He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, quiet. As he approached, she saw his face more clearly, weathered, lined, a heavy jaw, eyes that seemed to hold a deep, quiet sadness. Not cruel eyes, but wary, reserved. He stopped a few feet away, his hands resting on his hips, simply observing. The infant let out another weak cry, and the sound seemed to break the tableau. His gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. He knelt down, slowly, his movements careful despite his size. He didn't speak, just looked from her face to the infant's. There was no gasp of horror, no immediate judgment in his expression, only a profound stillness, a quiet assessment. She saw his eyes note the bloodstains on her tattered clothes, the pallor of her skin, the desperation in her eyes. He reached out a large, calloused hand, hesitated, then gently touched the edge of the blanket covering the baby. His touch was surprisingly soft. "Child," he murmured, his voice deep and rough, like grinding stones. It was not a question, more a simple statement of fact. She could only nod, tears finally escaping, tracing cold paths down her dirty cheeks. He stood up again, looking around the desolate clearing, then back at her. His expression remained unreadable for a moment, a study in quiet contemplation. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, the only sound in the silence. He turned and walked back to his wagon, rummaged inside, and returned with a thick wool blanket and a flask. He knelt again, wrapping the blanket firmly around her shoulders and the baby, trapping a measure of warmth against the cold. Then he uncorked the flask and held it to her lips. "Drink," he said, his voice low. It was water, cool and life-giving. She drank greedily, some of it spilling onto her chin. He didn't remark on it. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs trembled uncontrollably, refusing to obey. He saw her struggle. Without a word, he reached out and gently, but firmly, lifted her into his arms, cradling the baby protectively against her. He was surprisingly strong, her weight seemingly insignificant to him. He carried her to the wagon, settling her carefully amongst some hay and empty sacks. He placed the infant securely beside her, ensuring they were both well wrapped in the blanket. He then climbed onto the driver's seat. "My place is not far," he said, looking ahead down the rough track. "It's simple, but it's dry and warm." He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what had happened. He just started the wagon, the wheels turning slowly, carrying them away from the silent, unforgiving woods. The small cabin was indeed simple, built of rough-hewn logs, squat and solid against the elements. Inside, it was clean but sparse, a hearth with a perpetually low-burning fire, a rough table, a single cot, and shelves holding practical, well-used items. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and dry earth. The man, whose name she learned later was Elias, carried her inside and settled her on the cot, placing the baby gently beside her. He built the fire higher, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, pushing back the damp chill that had settled deep within her. He brought her a bowl of thin, warm broth, and she ate slowly, feeling the life seep back into her veins with each mouthful. He watched her with those quiet, reserved eyes, but said little. He didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. He simply existed, a silent, capable presence in the small space. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Elias went about his routine, tending his small plot of land, checking snares, mending fences, leaving her to rest, venturing outside only when necessary, always keeping an eye on the cabin. He brought her food plain but nourishing and fresh water. He changed the baby's few, soiled cloths with a surprising lack of awkwardness, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He never commented on her past, her situation, or the child's lack of a name or father. His silence was not indifferent, but respectful, like he understood some fundamental pain she carried and would not add to it with questions. She, in turn, said little. Her voice felt rusty, unused. Shame still clung to her, a heavy shroud. But beneath it, a fragile sense of safety began to bloom. The fear lessened its grip. The constant thrum of anxiety softened. She watched Elias, the quiet strength in his movements, the way he handled the land and his tasks with a patient, deliberate hand. She saw the solitary nature of his life, etched into the lines on his face and the quiet rhythm of his days. He seemed as much a part of this wild, isolated landscape as the trees and the rocks. As her physical strength returned, so did a restless need to contribute. She couldn't bear to be a burden, a recipient of charity she felt she didn't deserve. One morning, she quietly rose from the cot and began to tidy the cabin, sweeping the floor with a twig broom, arranging the few dishes. Elias returned from his work and paused in the doorway, watching her. He didn't stop her, didn't thank her. He simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but to her, it felt like an acknowledgement, a silent acceptance. Later, she attempted to help him in the small garden patch, carefully weeding between the rows of struggling vegetables. He worked beside her for a while, still mostly silent, but his presence was no longer intimidating. There was a companionable quiet between them. He showed her how to sharpen a tool, how to store dried herbs, how to patch a tear in cloth with strong, neat stitches. Small, practical lessons offered without fuss or expectation. Slowly, painstakingly, the silence between them filled not with words, but with shared tasks, the rhythm of daily life, and a growing, unspoken understanding. She began to notice the subtle changes in his demeanor, a fraction less tension in his shoulders when he was near the baby, a fleeting, almost smile when the infant gripped his finger. She hadn't told him her name. He hadn't asked. For now, she was simply the woman, and the baby was the child. In this quiet, isolated corner of the world, they were simply three souls, finding a precarious balance against the vastness. As weeks turned into months, a quiet rhythm settled over the small cabin. The woman, who finally introduced herself as Clara, regained her health, her pallor replaced by a healthier tone from the simple food and fresh air. The infant, whom she had named Lily, thrived under their shared care, her cries growing stronger, her tiny hands reaching out for the world. Elias remained a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He built a small cradle for Lily, crafting it with surprising skill and care from local wood. He taught Clara how to safely fetch water from the nearby stream, how to recognize edible plants and dangerous ones, how to prepare the soil for planting. Their days became a shared sequence of tasks, tending the garden, gathering firewood, preparing simple meals, caring for Lily. There was no declaration of affection, no grand gestures, but in the quiet understanding that passed between them over a shared meal, or the way Elias's gaze lingered on Lily, there was a deep, unspoken bond forming. Clara found herself watching him, observing the quiet strength and resilience that defined him. He had secrets, she knew, a history etched in the guardedness of his eyes, but he did not burden her with them, just as she did not elaborate on the painful circumstances that had brought her to his doorstep. Their pasts remained submerged, the present their shared territory. For Clara, this isolated existence, free from the judging eyes of the world she had known, was a form of healing. The shame still lingered, a scar on her soul, but here, it did not define her. Here, she was simply Clara, a woman caring for her child, working the land, existing. One crisp autumn afternoon, a rider approached the cabin, a man she recognized, though she hadn't seen him among those who had left her. He was connected to the family she had worked for, the ones who had cast her out. Fear, cold and visceral, flooded back. Elias stepped out of the cabin, his expression hardening, his body language subtly shifting from relaxed farmer to something still and formidable. The man was belligerent, demanding. He had heard rumors, vague tales of a woman and child found in the woods. He spoke of scandal, of retrieving what was theirs, property, control, whatever cruel claim they felt they held over her and Lily. His eyes were narrow with suspicion and contempt. Clara stood behind Elias, Lily clutched tightly in her arms, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Elias listened, his face impassive. When the man finished his blustering demands, Elias simply shook his head. "There is no one here you seek," he said, his voice low, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an unmistakable weight of finality. "Only me." And mine, the word mine hung in the air, a quiet assertion of possession, of protection. The man scoffed, threatening to return with others, to inform the authorities. Elias didn't flinch. "These woods are vast," he said, his gaze meeting the man's squarely. "And lonely. Travelers sometimes get lost." It wasn't an overt threat, but the implication was clear, chilling. The man, sensing the quiet danger radiating from Elias, hesitated. He glared at Clara, then back at Elias, a flicker of fear in his eyes. With a final, frustrated curse, he turned his horse and rode away, swallowed by the trees. Clara watched him go, trembling, the breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaping in a ragged gasp. Elias turned, his expression softening slightly as he looked at her and Lily. He didn't say, "Are you all right?" or "He won't come back." He simply reached out and, very gently, brushed a strand of hair from Clara's face. It was the most physical contact they had shared, a touch of quiet reassurance. In that moment, Clara understood the depth of his commitment, the silent promise of protection woven into the fabric of their shared life. The fear receded, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude, and something else, something warmer and deeper she dared not name. She had been left for dead, discarded by a world that judged and condemned. She had found refuge not through pity or obligation, but through a quiet, stoic kindness offered by a solitary man who asked for nothing in return. Survival was not just about enduring the elements or escaping threats. It was about finding connection in the face of isolation, about rebuilding life from the ashes of despair. Here, in this simple cabin, surrounded by the vast, indifferent beauty of the wilderness, she had found not just safety, but a quiet dignity she thought she had lost forever. She had come here broken, vulnerable, defined by loss and shame. But now, holding her child, standing beside this silent, steadfast man, she felt a strength she had never known. Her resilience, tested by the harshest cruelties, had not only ensured her survival but had led her to a place of unexpected belonging. Their future was not certain. The world outside still held judgment and potential danger. But together, in the quiet rhythm of their days, tending the land, raising the child, they had forged a bond stronger than any external threat. They were survivors, yes, but more than that, they were a testament to the quiet power of human connection born of shared hardship and unspoken understanding. They were a family, unconventional and forged in the crucible of abandonment, but real and resilient nonetheless. And as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple over their small, protected world, Clara looked at Elias, at Lily, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a gentle stir of hope, as vast and quiet as the landscape that surrounded them.